Every place has a story. Some should never be told. As the light fades and the world grows quiet, the stories begin. This is Dusk Tales, where forgotten places, unexplained events, and the edges of reality come to life. Story 1. He clearly remembered helping the man change his tire. They spoke for at least 10 minutes. Calm conversation. Normal conversation. The kind you forget about 5 minutes later. But his partner, sitting just 20 feet away in the passenger seat, would later swear something that made no sense at all. He never saw anyone. Not a car. Not a person. Not even headlights. The Appalachian Mountains, deep in northern Georgia. He wasn't new. He wasn't easily shaken. And he definitely wasn't the kind of person who believed every strange story told around campfires. But there was one road he never liked. State Route 180. A narrow, winding stretch of asphalt that cut through dense forest, climbing and dipping through ridges and valleys like a black ribbon. During the day, it was beautiful. At night, it felt different, not dangerous, just isolated, quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence. Daniel and his colleague, Eric Hale, had just started their first real break in months. 4 days off, no radios, no patrol routes, no emergency calls. Just a long drive back to Daniel's hometown, a small place tucked beyond the mountains where his parents still lived. They left late. Too late, honestly. It was already past 11:30 p.m. when they packed the last of their bags into Daniel's dark green Ford Ranger pickup. The air was warm, but not uncomfortable. Crickets filled the forest with a steady rhythm. The sky was clear, revealing more stars than most people ever noticed. Eric leaned back in the passenger seat, adjusting the air vent toward his face. "You ever notice," Eric said quietly, "how different this place feels at night?" Daniel smirked slightly. That alone was unusual. Eric always had something to say. But tonight, he just stared out the window into the dark tree line. And that's when something small but important happened. Daniel noticed there were fewer sounds. Not no sounds. Just fewer. The crickets were still there. The engine hummed normally. But there was an absence of everything else. No wind, no movement. No distant animals shifting through the trees. Just stillness. And then, about 20 minutes into the drive, they reached one of the sharper curves. Daniel slowed the truck slightly, guiding it carefully along the bend. And that's when he saw him. A man, standing beside a car. The vehicle was parked awkwardly on the shoulder, its right rear corner angled slightly toward the road. One of the tires was flat. The trunk was open, and the man was crouched beside it, struggling with what looked like a spare. Daniel immediately felt that familiar instinct, the ranger instinct. People needed help out here more often than they admitted. Flat tires, dead batteries, wrong turns. It happened all the time. Without thinking twice, Daniel eased his foot onto the brake. The truck slowed, then rolled to a stop about 20 feet behind the stranded car. Eric shifted slightly in his seat. "Why are we stopping?" he asked casually. Daniel kept his eyes forward. "Guy's got a flat." Eric leaned forward slightly, squinting into the darkness. "Where?" Daniel frowned, confused by the question. "Right there." He pointed toward the shoulder. Eric leaned closer to the windshield, then paused. "I don't see anyone." Daniel assumed he just wasn't looking carefully. It was dark, after all. He opened the driver's door. "I'll be right back." The night air was warmer than he expected. Still quiet, still heavy. The man beside the car looked up as Daniel approached. He appeared to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. Short brown hair, plain clothes. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable. Just an ordinary person. "Evening," Daniel said calmly. The man nodded politely. "Evening." His voice sounded completely normal. Not strained, not nervous, just calm. Daniel gestured toward the tire. "Need a hand?" The man smiled slightly, clearly relieved. "Would appreciate it." Daniel stepped closer, crouching beside him. The spare was already in position. It just needed to be secured properly. "Been out here long?" Daniel asked. The man shook his head. "Not too long." They worked quietly for a moment. The metallic clicks of the lug wrench echoed faintly into the trees. And then the man spoke again. "You from around here?" Daniel nodded. "Used to be." He tightened another lug nut. "Heading back for a few days?" The man smiled faintly. "That's good." Something about the way he said it lingered. Not strange, just meaningful, as if the words carried more weight than expected. They finished securing the tire. Daniel stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "That should hold." The man nodded gratefully. "Thank you." They stood there for another moment. Just two people on a quiet mountain road. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. And yet, Daniel would later realize something important. He never heard any insects while standing beside the man. Not one. Just silence. The man extended his hand. Daniel shook it. His grip felt normal, warm, solid, real. "Safe travels," the man said. "You too," Daniel replied. Daniel turned and walked back toward his truck. Everything felt completely ordinary, until he opened the driver's door. Eric was staring at him. Not casually, not normally, but with visible confusion. "Who were you talking to?" Daniel paused. He laughed slightly. "The guy with the flat tire." Eric didn't laugh. He didn't smile. He didn't move. Daniel noticed his expression hadn't changed at all. "I didn't see anyone," Eric said quietly. Daniel shook his head. He was right there. Eric turned slowly, looking out the passenger window again. There's no car. Daniel felt a small, unfamiliar tension settle in his chest. He turned, glancing through his own window toward the shoulder. He could still see it. The car. Parked in the same spot. The rear tire now replaced. The trunk still open. And yet, something felt different. Not visibly different. Just wrong. Eric spoke again. "Go look." Daniel hesitated. Not because he was afraid, but because, for the first time that night, he wasn't completely sure what he'd see. Daniel left the engine running. He didn't know why. Some instinct told him not to turn it off. The headlights stayed fixed on the shoulder ahead, illuminating the exact place where he had just stood moments earlier. He opened the door again and stepped out. The air immediately felt cooler, not dramatically, just enough to notice. Behind him, he heard Eric shift in his seat. "You sure you saw someone?" Eric asked. Daniel didn't answer. He simply walked forward. Each step felt slower than it should have. Measured. Careful. The gravel crunched under his boots. The sound carried farther than expected, echoing faintly into the trees. He kept his eyes locked on the spot where the car had been. The same spot where he had stood beside the man, where they had spoken, where they had shaken hands. But now, there was no car. No open trunk. No spare tire. Nothing. Just empty road shoulder. Daniel stopped walking. His mind struggled to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. He took another step forward, then another. Maybe he had the wrong spot. Maybe he'd misjudged the distance. But deep down, he knew he hadn't. Rangers developed a strong sense of place. It was part of the job. You remembered locations, distances, landmarks, and he remembered this exact curve. Because now he could see something else, something he hadn't noticed before. A small shape near the edge of the tree line, partially hidden in shadow, about 15 feet from the road. Daniel frowned. He slowly stepped closer. The truck's headlights didn't fully reach it, but there was enough light to make out its outline. It was a stone, not large, maybe 3 feet tall, rectangular, standing upright, deliberate. His stomach tightened, because he already knew what it was, even before he could read it. He stepped closer. The forest around him felt completely still. No wind, no insects, no movement, just his breathing. And the faint hum of the truck engine behind him. He reached the stone and looked down. It was a memorial marker, weathered slightly by time, but still clearly readable. The engraved letters were simple, clean, respectful. Daniel leaned closer and read the name. Thomas Whitaker, below it. Smaller text. 1971 to 2002. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He stared at the date again. 2002. 4 years earlier. His mind immediately began searching for explanations. Maybe coincidence. Maybe another stranded driver had stopped here before. Maybe... Then he noticed something else. At the base of the stone, there were small objects. Old, faded, artificial flowers, a cracked glass candle holder, and something else. A rusted circular piece of metal. Daniel crouched down slightly. He didn't touch it, but he recognized it instantly. It was part of a tire rim, old, corroded, left there intentionally. His breathing became shallow. Behind him, Eric called out from the truck. "Daniel?" His voice sounded distant, muted. Daniel didn't respond, because in that moment, something else became clear. He realized exactly where he had been standing earlier. Not beside a car, not beside a stranded driver. He had been standing right here, right beside this memorial, speaking to someone, helping someone, someone whose name was now carved in stone. His mind replayed the conversation, the man's calm voice, his steady handshake, his quiet smile. "You from around here?" The memory felt vivid, real, normal. And that was the part that disturbed him the most. Nothing about the interaction had felt unusual. No warning, no fear, just a quiet moment on a dark road. Eric's voice came again, louder now. "Daniel, what's going on?" But close. He reached the driver's door and opened it. Eric immediately saw his face. "What happened?" Eric asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He got inside, closed the door, locked it. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Eric stared at him. "You're pale," Eric said. Daniel swallowed. He forced himself to speak. "There's a memorial." Eric frowned. "For who?" Daniel hesitated, then said quietly, "A man who died here." Eric looked past him, toward the darkness outside. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The forest remained silent. Then Eric asked the question Daniel didn't want to hear. "Did you see his car?" Daniel shook his head. "No." Eric leaned back slowly. Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Daniel shifted the truck into drive. The tires rolled forward, gravel crunching beneath them. He didn't speed, not yet. But as they passed the spot, Daniel couldn't stop himself. He glanced toward the memorial one last time. For just a fraction of a second, he thought he saw something beside it. A shape, standing still, watching the road, watching them leave. Daniel immediately turned his eyes forward again. His hands tightened on the wheel. He pressed the accelerator harder. The truck surged forward. The curve disappeared behind them. Neither of them spoke for nearly 5 minutes. Then Eric asked quietly, "Did he say anything strange?" Daniel thought carefully. Every word, every detail, every second. And one sentence stood out, something that hadn't seemed unusual before. But now, it felt different. "That's good," the man had said, when Daniel told him he was heading home. Not drive safe, not good luck, just, "That's good." As if that had been all that mattered. Daniel didn't slow down for the next 20 miles. The curves blurred together. The trees became a dark wall on either side of the road. And the further they drove, the more unreal the last 10 minutes began to feel. Until Eric finally broke the silence. "You should tell me exactly what happened." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. He explained everything. Stopping, seeing the man, the conversation, the tire, the handshake. Eric didn't interrupt, not once. When Daniel finished, Eric sat quietly for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. "I believe you." Daniel glanced at him briefly. Eric wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. He was serious. "I didn't see anyone," Eric continued. "But that doesn't mean you didn't." Daniel didn't respond, because part of him didn't want validation. He wanted explanation, something logical, something normal. But nothing about it had been normal. They reached Daniel's hometown just after midnight. The familiar streets helped ground him. Streetlights, sidewalks, houses. Everything felt predictable again. Safe. They parked outside Daniel's family home. Before getting out, Eric said one more thing. "You ever heard of highway residual sightings?" Daniel frowned. "No." Eric shrugged. "My uncle used to talk about them. Said sometimes places remember things, especially sudden moments. Moments people never finished." Daniel didn't like the way that sounded. The next morning, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the name on the memorial. Thomas Whitaker. It stayed in his mind like an unfinished sentence. So he did what rangers often did when something didn't make sense. He researched it. He drove to the local library, asked the front desk about old newspaper archives. The librarian pointed him toward a microfilm reader. Daniel sat down, scrolled through local papers from 2002. Weeks passed in silence across the screen. Then he saw it. A small article, easy to miss. Local man killed in roadside accident. Daniel leaned closer. The article was brief. Thomas Whitaker, age 31. Vehicle disabled on mountain road late at night. Lost control while attempting to change a tire. No other vehicles involved. No witnesses. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. There was one line at the end, one detail that made his chest tighten. Whitaker had been returning home after visiting family. Daniel leaned back slowly. The room suddenly felt quieter. He left the library and stepped outside. The sunlight didn't help, because now he understood something he hadn't before. The man hadn't asked Daniel for help, not really. He had accepted it, calmly, gratefully, like someone who had been waiting a long time. Daniel returned home later that afternoon. He didn't tell his family, didn't tell anyone. Days passed, then weeks. Eventually the memory settled, not gone, but quieter, like a distant sound you stopped noticing. Until one night, months later, Daniel was back on duty, driving patrol, different road, different forest, but the same mountains, the same silence. He parked at an overlook, turned off the engine, and sat there, listening, watching. Rangers spent a lot of time observing, waiting, learning the rhythm of the wilderness. And that night, Daniel realized something important. He didn't feel afraid anymore. He felt calm, because whatever had happened, it hadn't tried to harm him, it hadn't tried to frighten him, it had simply existed, shared a moment, then stayed behind. Daniel never saw Thomas Whitaker again. But sometimes, when he drove those roads at night, he slowed down at certain curves, not out of fear, but out of respect, because he understood something most people never did. Not every presence in the wilderness is something to fear. Some are just echoes, moments that never fully ended, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to stop, even if only once. Story 2. The camp wasn't supposed to be there. Not on any map, not in any ranger report, not in any trail registry. But it was. Tucked deep inside a protected section of the Appalachian Mountains, hidden beyond marked paths and official routes, a cluster of weathered tents stood in complete silence. No people, no fire, no tracks leading away, just abandoned equipment, and a strange sense that someone, or something, had left only moments before I arrived. At first, I assumed it was an illegal moonshine operation. That theory didn't last long, because the deeper I went into that forest, the more I realized this wasn't just an illegal camp. It was something else entirely. And by the time I understood what I had stepped into, the forest had already begun to close in around me. The Appalachian Mountains have a way of making time feel unreliable. Out there, deep beneath the thick canopy and endless ridgelines, the hours blur together. The forest stretches endlessly in every direction, layered in fog, shadow, and ancient silence. Even after 10 years as a park ranger, there were places I still avoided unless absolutely necessary. That section of the forest was one of them. It sat far beyond the maintained trails, inside a protected conservation zone where only rangers were permitted. No hikers, no campers, no hunters. Officially, nothing ever happened there. Unofficially, every ranger knew the stories. Strange lights, disappearing sounds, compasses that refused to work, radio signals that dissolved into static without warning. Most of us dismissed it as folklore, the natural myths that always surround old wilderness. The Appalachians are among the oldest mountain ranges on Earth, older than trees themselves, worn down by hundreds of millions of years. People have been telling stories about them for just as long. But this patrol was different. It began with a broken signal. Around mid-morning, my radio crackled with a brief transmission. Just a half-second burst of static and distorted noise, before cutting off completely. At first, I thought it was interference from the terrain. That happened often in the valleys. Then I noticed something else. The forest had gone quiet, not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet, no birds, no insects, no distant wind through the leaves. Just the sound of my boots against damp soil and my own breathing. That's when I spotted the trail that wasn't supposed to exist. It was faint, almost invisible, a slight depression in the undergrowth, where vegetation had been pressed down repeatedly. Not a maintained path, not even a proper foot trail, just enough to suggest movement. Something had been walking through here. I followed it. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to shift. Trees grew denser. The air thickened, heavy with moisture and the smell of moss and decay. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the canopy, leaving everything bathed in a dull green twilight. After nearly an hour of hiking, the trail opened into a small clearing. And that's where I saw the camp. 4 tents, arranged in a loose semicircle, a stone fire pit in the center, Several overturned crates, empty food containers scattered around. It looked like someone had packed up in a hurry, but not entirely. Some gear remained: sleeping bags, cooking tools, lanterns, even a small portable radio unit. No people, no vehicles, no fresh tracks leading away. At first glance, I assumed moonshiners. Illegal distillation operations still pop up in remote Appalachian hollows. People set up temporary camps, cook small batches of alcohol, then disappear before authorities can track them. That theory made sense, at least until I started inspecting the equipment. There was no distilling gear, no tubing, no heating coils, no fermentation containers. Instead, I found notebooks, dozens of them, each one filled with handwritten observations, coordinates, times, weather conditions, phases of the moon, and sketches, strange ones. Symbols carved into tree trunks, rough drawings of twisted human shapes, patterns that repeated across multiple pages. The deeper I flipped through them, the more unsettled I felt. None of it looked recreational. This wasn't camping. This was monitoring, studying, watching. And then I noticed something carved into the tree at the edge of the clearing. 3 vertical lines, 1 diagonal slash crossing them. A marking I didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar, like a symbol I had seen in passing years ago, in a report I never quite understood. That's when the forest made its first sound. A single distant snap, like a branch breaking under careful pressure. I froze. My eyes scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but the silence had changed. It felt expectant. I radioed in. No response, only static. I stood there, alone in the clearing, surrounded by abandoned tents and cryptic notebooks, with the growing certainty that I was no longer the only presence in that forest. I took one of the journals and flipped to the final entry. The handwriting was hurried, uneven. Nothing like the neat, precise notes that filled the previous pages. They know when we watch. They move when we look away. The forest is not empty. It never was. Below that, one final sentence. If you find this camp, do not stay after sunset. I checked my watch. 4:47 p.m. Less than an hour of daylight remained. That was when the wind started. A slow breeze threaded through the trees, carrying with it a faint, unfamiliar scent. Not decay, not smoke. Something mineral, metallic, like wet stone after rain. The temperature dropped noticeably. My breath fogged in front of me. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. Not running, not stumbling, walking, circling the clearing. I spun in place, trying to pinpoint the source. Nothing. Just shadows slipping between tree trunks. I told myself it was wildlife. Deer, elk, black bear. But deep down, I knew better. Animals don't move like that. They don't walk in circles. They don't stop when you stop. They don't wait. The footsteps paused. Silence flooded back in. Then, directly behind me, a whisper brushed the air. So faint I almost imagined it. Almost. I didn't run. Training kicked in before panic could. Slow steps, calm breathing, no sudden movement. I backed toward the trail I'd entered from. That's when I realized it was gone. The faint path through the undergrowth had vanished, swallowed by dense vegetation as if it had never existed. Trees crowded closer together, their twisted trunks forming an uneven barrier around the clearing. The camp now felt like a trap. Another sound echoed through the forest. Not footsteps, not wind. Something deeper. A low vibration, like distant thunder rolling beneath the soil. My radio crackled again, not static. Voices, but layered. Multiple overlapping transmissions, bleeding into one another. Fragments of speech. Oh, don't stay. But they're closer. Can you see? Then silence. I forced myself to move. Choosing the most open-looking section of forest, I pushed forward, breaking through thick brush and low-hanging branches. Thorns tore at my uniform. Mud swallowed my boots. Behind me, branches snapped. Not one, several. Whatever had been watching was now following. But still, no running, just steady pursuit. The forest itself seemed to warp around me. Familiar landmarks vanished. Slopes felt steeper. Trees leaned at unnatural angles. My compass spun uselessly. North meant nothing here. After nearly 20 minutes of blind hiking, I burst into another clearing. This one was different. Stone formations rose from the ground in irregular clusters, forming a rough circular shape nearly 50 feet across. And at the center stood something I couldn't explain. A tree, but not quite. Its trunk twisted into a spiral, bark stripped away in places to reveal pale wood beneath. Strange symbols were carved deep into its surface, the same markings I had seen in the notebooks. And hanging from its branches were dozens of small objects. Charms, feathers, carved wooden tokens, faded strips of cloth. Offerings. Whatever this place was, it had been used for a very long time. The air vibrated around the tree, thick and heavy, like standing near high-voltage wires. That's when I understood. The camp hadn't been abandoned. It had been evacuated. A sudden pressure filled my ears. The forest dimmed. And for a moment, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw movement inside the tree itself. Not behind it, not around it, within it. And then my radio screamed back to life. A single clear transmission cut through the noise. Ranger, if you can hear this, get out now. Do not approach the stone clearing. Repeat, do not. The signal cut, and the forest went completely still. The radio fell silent in my hand. No static. No interference. Stone circle surrounding it. Every instinct told me to leave, to turn around, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever this place represented. But training and curiosity kept me rooted. Something had happened here. Something significant enough to make a group of experienced researchers abandon their equipment and flee without packing. And now I was standing at the heart of it. The forest felt different near the stone ring. The air pressed against my skin, heavy and charged. Every breath tasted faintly metallic, like distant rain hitting hot rock. Even sound behaved strangely. Footsteps felt muted, while the soft rustle of leaves carried far too clearly. I approached the tree. Up close, the carvings revealed themselves to be layered. Some symbols were old, deeply weathered. Others were fresh, cut sharply into living wood. Multiple generations. Whatever this site was, it had been used repeatedly over decades, maybe longer. A low hum pulsed beneath my feet, not sound exactly, more like vibration, as if the ground itself were quietly breathing. I circled the tree, careful not to step inside the stone ring. That's when I saw them. Footprints, bare, dozens of them, pressed into the damp soil inside the circle, some large, some small, none leading in, none leading out. My throat tightened. Before I could process that, a distant call echoed through the forest. Not a scream, not a cry for help. A long, hollow tone, rising and falling slowly. Almost musical, but wrong in ways I couldn't immediately describe. It seemed to come from everywhere. and nowhere. My radio flickered weakly. One faint bar of signal appeared, then vanished. Whatever lived here didn't like communication. I stepped back. That's when the forest shifted. Branches creaked overhead. Leaves stirred though the wind had completely stopped. The distant call faded, replaced by the faintest murmur, like overlapping whispers carried just beyond the edge of hearing. Not words, patterns, rhythms, the same cadence repeating over and over. The sensation was unsettlingly intimate, as though the forest itself were listening to my thoughts. I turned slowly, scanning the trees. Shadows pooled thickly between trunks. Then, movement. Just a flicker. Gone before I could focus on it. My heart rate climbed. Not panic. Recognition. This wasn't wildlife behavior. This was observation. I forced myself to retreat. The clearing radiated something I didn't understand and didn't trust. Following instinct more than direction, I pushed downslope, moving away from the stone ring and twisted tree. The forest gradually thinned, the oppressive pressure easing slightly with every step. After nearly 40 minutes of careful descent, I found something that didn't belong. A small ranger station, not abandoned, not destroyed. Simply forgotten. Its wooden walls were silvered with age. Moss crawled across the roof, windows clouded with grime and lichen. According to all official records, no outpost had ever existed in this sector. And yet, here it stood. I forced the door open. The hinges screamed in protest, echoing far louder than they should have. Inside, the air was stale but dry. A desk, 2 chairs, a metal filing cabinet, and on the far wall, a corkboard still covered in pinned documents. I crossed the room slowly. The papers were dated. Most were from the late 1970s. Incident reports, missing hikers, strange disturbances, radio failures, unexplained lights. Every few months, the same location appeared. Always the same coordinates. The stone clearing. And the twisted tree. My stomach tightened. At the bottom of the board, one report had been circled in the thick red marker. Disappearance. Ranger Daniel Holloway, 1978. I opened the attached file. The final entry read, Subject reports rhythmic vocalizations after sunset. Describes sensation of being watched from inside the trees. Compass non-functional. Visual anomalies present. Subject proceeding to investigate stone formation. No further entries, no recovery report, no closure, just absence. A chill crept up my spine. This wasn't a new phenomenon. It had been happening for at least half a century, probably much longer. And then I heard footsteps again, this time inside the station. Soft, careful, deliberate. I spun. The doorway stood empty, but the air beyond it had darkened. Twilight had fallen faster than it should have. My watch confirmed it. 6:02 p.m. Night was arriving early. The forest wanted darkness. I stepped outside. The woods had changed. Fog rolled between the trees, thick and low, swallowing visibility beyond 30 feet. Shadows pooled unnaturally, even where faint light still filtered through the canopy. Then I saw them. Figures, not solid, not quite transparent either. They stood scattered among the trunks, motionless, watching. Their forms were vaguely human, but distorted. Proportions subtly wrong, limbs slightly elongated, heads tilted at unnatural angles. I froze. Every instinct screamed danger, yet they didn't advance. They simply observed. And then, one of them shifted. It took a single step forward. The fog parted around it, revealing features that refused to fully resolve. as if my mind couldn't quite agree on what it was seeing. Not monstrous, not grotesque, just incorrect. A presence that didn't align with reality. My radio crackled violently. Multiple overlapping voices burst through. Some whispered, some pleaded, some simply repeated the same phrase. "Don't let them see you looking back." I shut my eyes, counted 3 breaths. When I opened them again, the figures were gone. The forest exhaled, but the feeling remained. I was no longer alone, and whatever existed here now knew exactly where I stood. I ran. Training abandoned, survival took over. Branches lashed my face, roots snagged my boots. The fog thickened, warping distance and depth. Every few seconds, I glanced back. Like pressure moving through air, like displacement. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. Then, through the fog, I saw a faint yellow glow. A trail marker. Relief surged. I pushed forward, bursting onto an official hiking trail. Instantly, the fog thinned. The forest felt normal. Birds chirped. Wind whispered through leaves. The unnatural silence vanished. I collapsed to my knees, gasping. Behind me, the fog receded, stopping precisely at the tree line. As if unwilling to cross, for several minutes, I remained there, breathing hard, heart hammering, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined any of it. Then I checked my GPS. 3 hours had passed. I had been running for less than 15 minutes. Officially, the incident was logged as environmental disorientation due to atmospheric conditions. The camp was never found again. The stone clearing did not exist on any map. Satellite images showed nothing unusual. The ranger station never existed, at least not in the records. But sometimes, late at night, my radio still activates on its own. A few seconds of static. A whisper of voices, and occasionally a familiar phrase. Don't stay after sunset. In the days after the incident, I submitted a full report. Every detail, every sound, every symbol, every abnormal reading. It took nearly 6 hours to write. The response was brief. No anomalies detected. No further action required. No follow-up questions. No request for clarification. No scheduled debrief. The message felt rehearsed, as if it had been sent many times before. Still, I couldn't let it go. So I started researching. Not official databases, not ranger archives, older sources, local records, university field studies, indigenous oral histories, obscure environmental surveys. And slowly, a pattern emerged. Long before the first European settlers reached the Appalachians, the local tribes had marked certain areas as forbidden. Not sacred, not cursed, but contained. Places where the boundary between what is seen and unseen was believed to thin. Areas meant to remain undisturbed. One location matched my coordinates almost exactly. Translated loosely, its name meant the place that watches. According to tribal records, the forest there was believed to house something ancient, not a spirit, not a creature, but a presence tied to the land itself. Not hostile, not benevolent, simply aware. Stories spoke of hunters who vanished, only to return days later, confused, unable to recall where they had been. Others claimed to hear voices calling their names from deep within the woods, voices that sounded like loved ones long gone. The tribes didn't fear the forest. They respected it. And more importantly, they avoided it. The abandoned camp finally began to make sense. Those notebooks weren't random observations. They were field research logs, a private study. Someone had been monitoring electromagnetic fluctuations, seismic micro-vibrations, and atmospheric distortions, all centered around that stone clearing, which suggested only one thing: someone else already knew, and they were studying it. I reached out quietly to a former university contact, a geophysicist who specialized in deep Earth anomalies. Without revealing specifics, I described the readings from the notebooks. His response was unsettling. "Those patterns suggest a localized gravitational disturbance," he said. "Not enough to affect large objects, but enough to interfere with perception, time, and spatial orientation." In simple terms, the forest wasn't haunted. It was unstable, and something within it was bending reality in subtle ways. Stone formations, similar to the one I found, exist across multiple continents. From the Scottish Highlands to the Andes to isolated regions of Siberia, always in remote terrain. Always in geologically old regions. Always associated with strange reports. Many researchers believe these structures mark naturally occurring energy convergence points. Places where underground mineral deposits, magnetic fields, and tectonic stress lines intersect. The result? Zones where human perception becomes unreliable, where sound travels incorrectly, where time stretches or compresses, where the brain fills in gaps with imagined shapes and voices. But that explanation still didn't account for everything. Not the footprints, not the figures, not the whispers. For weeks, nothing happened. Then one night, around 2:13 a.m., my radio activated on my bedside table. Soft static. Then a single clear transmission. Not from dispatch, not from any known frequency. Just 4 words. Still watching, still waiting. The signal cut. My bedroom felt colder, the air heavier. And for a brief moment, I had the overwhelming sense that the forest wasn't confined to the mountains anymore. It had learned how to listen. Months later, I received an unmarked envelope in the mail. No return address. Perfectly visible, perfectly centered. Except for one detail. Standing at the center of the circle was a lone figure, looking straight up, toward the camera, toward me. On the back, a short message was handwritten. Observation requires reciprocity. Whatever exists in those mountains is older than our maps, older than our stories, and far older than our understanding. We walk through forests believing they are empty, but perhaps some places are not meant to be explored, not because they are dangerous, but because they are aware. And the moment you realize that, you can never truly be alone in the wilderness again. Because somewhere out there, something is still watching, waiting, learning. Some places are older than memory, and some stories are still waiting to be told. If you enjoy immersive slow-burn mystery and atmospheric storytelling, consider subscribing to Dusk Tales.